Joined once more prior to the draft by senior producer from NFL Films, Greg Cosell, as we dive in to the edge rushing group, knowing that, well, if the receiver value gets blown up in round one for the Bills, edge rusher could be a consideration. Greg, how we doing?
We're doing great. I've started to actually think, I don't normally do this, Brownie. I started to think about, guys who are going to go early and how the draft might play out. Normally, I just love the process of watching players. You guys know I don't do mocks and I don't make lists, but I think it's very possible that 7 of the first 10 players are going to be quarterbacks and wide receivers. Don't you think?
Yeah, I mean that's the big question. It could be a record-setting season for wideouts in the first round, quarterbacks in the first round, all of that.
Yeah, that's going to push people back. It makes her. I think after you get sort of past the 10th pick, it gets really, really intriguing.
Yeah, the top 10 is going to have a lot to say about what happens later in terms of position runs and everything else. Yep. But let's dive into some of these edge prospects here. We'll begin with Jared Verse, the Florida State kid, first-team All-ACC, 9-sack season last year. What would you call his strengths, Greg?
Power. He's a first-step explosive power edge player who's better in a three-point stance than he is standing up. When he stands up, he has false steps and wasted motion. When his hand's in the ground, he comes off the ball, no false steps, and he's really explosive. He attacks the edge. He's a speed to power guy. He's purposeful. I think he has a plan. Because all he has to do is get them out of phase, get an offensive tackle out of phase just a little bit, get them off balance just enough, and then he executes that speed to power. And he does not need a long runway to generate power. He can do it in a confined amount of space, and that's a really important trait to have. But his game is built on power.
And so, you think a power guy like that would be just as good in the run as the pass rush?
I think there's a run element to his game for sure, Steve. I mean, I think he's got the strength, he's got the hand quickness to play off contact in the run game and make plays. He's quick in a short area. But obviously the pass rush is what he is. And you talk to offensive linemen and they will tell you if they feel they can be beaten by speed to power, it clearly changes the way they pass set.
And then just watching him a little bit myself, Greg, there were a couple of moves that kind of caught my eye. He's got a swim move that seems to be effective for him. And he's also got that stack and pull through move where he kind of grabs the jersey of the tackle and he just pulls himself through. That seems to be two of the ones he likes to turn to the most. How varied would you say his repertoire is?
I wouldn't say it's extremely varied, and I think you can always work on that. But I think the power element as the starting point is a better element to start with than the guys who are, just bendy and work off the edge. Because, again, I was fortunate enough last year to go to the O-Line Masterminds event with Duke Manyweather down in Texas. And you hear all these offensive tackles talk about how they are more concerned about the speed to power guys right off the bat because it just changes things for them if they know they can be physically beaten. The guys who are a little bit of the dancers, who are the quicker guys, they always feel that they can handle. But the speed to power is harder.
So as you talk about the rest of these guys, one of the more intriguing guys out there is a highly talented guy out of UCLA, Laiatu Latu. He seems to me, and I was saying this just in the last segment when we had Maddie on, if he was 5'9", he'd still be a really good-looking athlete, right?
Oh, yeah.
But he's got the neck injury, and once you set aside the history of maybe what happened with he retired once because of a neck injury, now he's back and he's played extremely well, how good can he be on the upside?
Yeah, I obviously can't speak to the medical, not being a doctor, although I have spoken to some GMs who say that it's possible that he might not be on 12 or 15 draft boards because of the injury. So we don't know that, but let's just evaluate the player. For me, and again, not making a list, but I was most intrigued by him. I think you're dealing with a guy that can bend. I think he's got enough power, not as powerful as Verse, but enough power. And I got to tell you, I thought that for a college pass rusher, he had a lot of tools in the toolbox. He was the most refined in terms of his moves, his hand usage. He's relentlessly competitive. To me, he was the overall #1 edge pass rusher. And I'm going to say something now, and I want people to understand what I'm about to say. I'm going to compare him to someone who I'm comparing him to when this player came out of college, because the player I'm going to compare him to is arguably a top 3 pass rusher in the league. Some might think he's the best pass rusher in the league, but he reminded me of TJ Watt when Watt came out of Wisconsin. And Latu, they're about the same size in terms of, dimensionally, and they're very similar to me.
Yeah, and the thing about him that you don't always see with pass rushers is he's an anticipatory player. Because there'll be times where he'll be on the rush and he'll see something in the backfield, or he'll realize he's not going to get there. He'll actually stop his rush, get into the passing lane, and bat a pass down instead.
Yeah.
I mean, he had 2 interceptions last year, too.
Yeah, no, he's a really good player. I mean, he's got size, he's got length. He's explosive. As I said, he's advanced and refined with his hand usage, multiple moves in his arsenal. They dropped him into coverage quite a bit, as you just said, Brownie. I mean, this guy's a really, really good athlete. To me, other than perhaps not being super powerful, I don't know if he had a defined weakness where he said, man, he just can't do this at all. Power, like I said, he's certainly not the most powerful guy, but I wouldn't view that as a weakness.
So is he more comfortable, and I know you're comparing him to different guys in the league, is he more comfortable with his hand off the ground or in a 3-point? Would he be okay in a 4-3 defensive end, or does he need to stand up?
Guy, Steve.
More of a stand-up guy?
That's his game more. Again, I'm not sure, with his hand on the ground, how comfortable he is. I don't know the answer to that, but he really stood up a lot at UCLA.
All right, next guy on the list is probably the Ferrari of the group, Chop Robinson, who pretty much blew up Lucas Oil Stadium with his workout as anticipated. Guy's all about speed.
Yeah, I mean, he's clearly the most sudden and explosive of all these guys. At this point, that's his game. I don't know if he has a lot more to his game at this point. I made the point that he needs to develop a much wider array of moves and counters to become a higher level pass rusher at the next level. To me, and I don't know if this fits the Bills, he's a guy you'd want to move around. Obviously he's an edge player at his core, but you get to 3rd down, you want to move him around, you want to make him a stand-up joker, you want to give him a runway to use that speed and velocity. He's a guy, to me, that that's what you'd want to do with him. He's nowhere near as powerful as Micah Parsons, but in a sense, you'd want to use him like that, where you line him up in different places in those pass rushing situations, as opposed to just putting him on the edge with his hand in the ground.
And just real quick, Greg, because some people look at him and say, oh, well, he's not very big. Is he a better fit as a 3-4 outside linebacker? But he's not really long enough to do that, right?
Well, I mean, his arm length is not long. That's, people do look at arm length. I find that out more and more each year. I mean, he's 6'3", 254. He's not a little guy. And obviously he's got tremendous athletic testing measurables, but no, his arm length isn't long. I don't know. That'd be a really interesting question for a, D-line / linebacker coach, whether he could be a stand-up linebacker. I mean, he's not an off the ball linebacker, if that's what you're asking. But he's not that for sure.
And then let's go on to a defensive end prospect, Darius Robinson out of Missouri. He was another first team All SEC, had 14 tackles for loss, 8.5 sacks. What are your thoughts on Darius Robinson?
Yeah, I really like this kid. Steve, you played just a few years ago, obviously, back in the day when, think of the old school strong side DNs in a 4-3, that would line up over the tight end. This guy, if he was playing back then, this guy would be the poster child for that. This guy's game is, he's got tremendous length and mass throughout his body. His game reflects those attributes. He's got really strong hands, strong grip, arm extension. He locks out. He sets the edge. I think he'll develop more as a pass rusher the more he plays. I really like Darius Robinson a lot. I mean, you don't see a lot of 6'5", 285 DNs these days. Tremendous arm length. Really, you wouldn't call a guy that big sudden, but he's a very good athlete for his size. I mean, those guys that big, you can always say they're a little stiff and tight, but it's just they're very big. Guys like that are not going to look like and move like Chop Robinson. This guy, the more I watched him, and I think he's the kind of guy you have to keep watching because he's not going to make those dynamic, spectacular, explosive plays where you go, oh my God, look at that. But you keep watching him and watching him and watching him, and snap after snap after snap, he's just a really good player.
Yeah, and I don't know, body type wise, he looks like Jadeveon Clowney.
Well, he's bigger than Jadeveon Clowney.
Is he? Is he? Okay.
Oh, wow.
But Clowney was 270. He's almost the exact same measurables as Cam Jordan when he came out of Cal.
Okay.
Jordan might have been just a little quicker, naturally quicker, but Robinson's measurables are almost exactly the same as Cam Jordan's.
Yeah, and I would say, and maybe this is because he's not super explosive, being 280 something pounds, but I like how when he has the play, when the play is there to be made, you see so many edge rushers blow by the quarterback or whiff on the ball carrier. I don't see that with him nearly as much as you do with some other players in this class.
Yeah, he's like I said, I just think he's a really good player. I think he's solid, efficient, consistent. He may not be the kind of guy, certainly early in his career, that gets 12 or 13 sacks. Could he develop into that? Possibly. But I also think he'll be the kind of guy you could line up year one and he'd play meaningful snaps and be good at what he's asked to do.
Yeah, as we go on down, let's talk about edge prospect Austin Booker out of Kansas. Brownie likes this guy.
Yeah, I went back and forth on him as I kept watching him. I mean, the guy hasn't played a lot of football. That's the thing. He only played 505 snaps in his entire career at Kansas. So what you have to assess is not what he is now, but what you think he can become. So he's a classic projection, which is mostly what the draft is. But some guys, they play a lot. He has not played a lot of football. He's long. He's got plus athleticism and movement. He shows in flashes, both as a run defender and pass rusher. It's in his body to become a quality edge pass rusher. It's not there yet. Right now he lacks play strength. Can he gain weight? It looks like when you watch him that he has room in his body to gain some weight, and ideally he doesn't lose the quickness that he has. But right now he's not a strong player. I think he was 240 at the combine, and that's, obviously he needs to get bigger than that, because at 240 he'd have to be a stand-up guy, not a hand in the ground guy. I think that he showed enough flashes on tape where you believe that he could develop into a quality edge player at the next level. I wouldn't say that's a certainty, though. So I think he's a clear case of projecting what you think a player could become.
Yeah, he's got tools, but there's some development that has to happen there. So that probably puts him like late day 2, early day 3. That's probably where.
I mean, when was the last time there was a guy coming out that's being talked about that played 500 snaps in college?
Right.
Yeah, but I mean, Greg Rousseau was only a 1-year starter, and he was a first-round pick.
Yeah, but the thing is that Booker, he was a 1-year starter, but he played football. Booker's only played 500 snaps.
Right. That is a small.
That's like a training camp back in the day.
Yeah. I mean, so that's. We'll see. Hey, he's one of those guys. Maybe in 3 years we'll be saying he's a great player, Brownie. That's the thing. Those are the kinds of decisions that people with much larger investment portfolios than me will have to make.
Yeah, but the guys like Austin Booker, you're talking about maybe a 4th rounder or 5th rounder for him, right?
Well, again, if you feel really confident based on the kid, based on studying everything about him, doing the kind of due diligence, Steve, that I can't do because I don't work for a team, and you feel really, really good, you could see him as a day 2 pick for sure, because really, really good might mean he could become a really explosive pass rusher.
Like what kind of pro player would his game be similar to?
Well, he's certainly not as bendy and as flexible as Brian Burns, who just signed with the Giants. But in terms of just kind of the length, you know, and again, that's not a direct apples to apples comparison. And I didn't know you were going to ask me that, so I don't want people to think, you know, that just popped into my head. But I think you're talking about a long, leaner guy that ideally can bend, but also has some explosiveness in his body.
Right.
Yeah. I know he wasn't on our list, Greg. Did you see Chris Braswell, the Alabama kid?
Oh yeah.
So
like
what do you make of him, and how do you avoid falling of, you know, looking at his older tape and knowing he's on the other side of a guy that was a top 5 pick and that kind of stuff, and then ultimately where do you come down on him, knowing, you know, he had a teammate in Dallas Turner on the other side? How do you kind of gauge his productivity and ability?
Ultimately, you know, Brownie, not relevant to me. I'm looking at the player. I think he's a lowercase Jared Verse. I think his game is built on power. I thought he got better as the year progressed. His speed to power conversion is really good, and he challenged the high side. He threatened the edge, and then he would drive right into O tackles with velocity, explosive power, explosive closing burst to the quarterback, set the edge. The guy who in some ways he reminded me of, and again, now I'm going back a few years, but, you know, I've been doing this a long time. The guy I'm about to mention weighed a little more coming out of college. He was a small school guy, but he's developed into one of the better pass rushers in the league. He reminded me of Matthew Judon coming out of Grand Valley State, who was a 5th-round pick.
Yeah, to me, I feel like if he develops a pass rush arsenal, he could be a really productive player. I think I agree. That's the thing that's missing for him. He's got to get an arsenal.
And it's funny you say that, because I said that he needs to develop a wide array of pass rush moves and counters to become a truly effective edge pass rusher in the league. But again, you're starting with power, and the guy's improved every year. He was a fun guy to watch. I think he'll play in the league. The question is, what will he become? Another guy you sort of have to project in your mind, you know, based on your due diligence, what do you think he can become? But I liked his tape.
Yeah. Okay, so we're probably not going to get a chance to talk to you because the draft is going to happen on Thursday of this next week, and this will probably be our last chance to touch base with you before that happens. So I'm just going to ask you, so you've looked at a gazillion guys in this draft. 2 things. One, give this draft class a grade at the top and pick your guy.
Well, I think that it's a wide receiver and offensive tackle draft in terms of probably the most depth. And then if I had to pick a guy that I really, really like, and again, I don't know where he's going to get drafted. I believe he'll be a 1st-round pick, but I really like Byron Murphy, the D tackle from Texas. I just love this guy. To me, is just a really, really good prospect. And that's just a name because, Steve, I didn't know what you were going to ask me. So I'm sure if I started looking at a list, but we don't have that kind of time, there'd be plenty of others that stood out to me. But he's just a guy that I just think he's going to be a really, really good player. Like, to me, he's and not to say anything negative here about a Buffalo player, but he's just a better Ed Oliver. Like, he's just that kind of, you know, he weighs a little more, but he's that kind of player, you know, with the explosiveness.
Right.
But I just think he's got better overall traits.
Yeah, somebody that big shouldn't be that athletic, but he is.
Oh, my God. And he's I mean, you see him take on double teams and the way he just kind of gets down on all 4s and then still makes plays, still makes the tackle.
Yeah, it's amazing. Greg, thanks as always. We will catch up with you. Appreciate all the insight on the players. I'm sure you probably gave yourself a to-do list for about 20 more guys you want to get to before the draft.
Oh, so. I'm grinding here. I'm grinding. Yeah.
Good luck getting through your list.
All right. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it.